So, good evening. How's everybody doing? Yeah, good. So, as James was saying, tonight should be awesome. So, I'm Dr. Victor Science. For those of you that I don't know, I'm executive director here at Houston Institute. And before I introduce our speakers, I just want to tell you a little bit about our schedule tonight and also tell you a little bit about a really exciting opportunity we have here at Houston Institute. So, about schedule, so each speaker will have about 20 to 25 minutes to make their case for their position. We'll hear a defense of the materialist view by Professor Weisberg first, and then we'll follow a defense of the non-materialist view by Professor Pruss. Then each speaker will have about 10 to 15 minutes to respond to the other's arguments. Finally, we should have ample time for Q&A from questions from the audience, from you guys. So that should be awesome. We'll wrap up at around 8:45 or so, and we'll have a small reception outside. I hope you guys can join us to continue the conversation. If there's a burning question you want to ask Professors Weisberg or Pruss, please make sure to join us for some refreshments and hopefully some refreshing answers. So I want everybody to take a second to look at your programs. So I hope everybody got one of these. You'll notice that there's a QR code in the back. There's a QR code in the back. So you can use that QR code to submit questions. So you'll notice if you scan that, it takes you through to a page and you can submit your questions there. I should say, so as the presentations get going, feel free to start submitting questions. So you don't need to wait until the formal Q&A session to start registering some of the questions or thoughts or objections that you want to raise to our speakers. So feel free to do that as well. I also mentioned there's an exciting opportunity here at the Houston Institute. So as you know, as some of you know, we're an independent academic nonprofit, and we're fully funded by grants and donations from people like you all. And it's because of people like you all that we're able to run events like this. So what is the exciting opportunity? The exciting opportunity is that our umbrella organization has given us a matching grant. So all donations up to a total of about 50K will be matched. New donations dollar for dollar, and repeat donations will be matched by whatever the increased amount from the previous year. So I'm delighted to say that we're already about a third of the way there. So if you're interested in the kind of work that we do, if you want to support us, I hope you'll consider making a donation. You're getting the free version, so you're getting ads. That's what that means. So good. So now let me introduce our speakers for tonight. So first, Professor Josh Weisberg is full professor of philosophy at the University of Houston. He is author or editor of several books, among them Consciousness in 2014 and Explanatory Optimism about the Hard Problem of Consciousness in 2023, in addition to multiple journal articles on topics in the philosophy of mind. He also has research interests in the philosophy of science, pragmatism, and political psychology. So we'll be hearing from Professor Weisberg first. Professor Alexander Pruss is also full professor and department chair at Baylor University in Waco, Texas. So thank you for coming down the road to see us. So Professor Pruss is the author of numerous books, among them The Principle of Sufficient Reason, a Reassessment in 2006, Actuality, Possibility, and Worlds in 2011, One Body, an Essay in Christian Sexual Ethics in 2012, and most recently, I believe, Infinity, Causation, and Paradox in 2018, in addition to numerous articles in metaphysics, the philosophy of religion, and other areas. Fun fact, he also has a PhD in math. Also fun fact, he is the holder of 2 Guinness World Records for rock climbing. So figure that is a fun fact, actually. So if you're wondering, it's fastest speed in climbing a mile, and for the fastest distance climbed in an hour. Very good. So a couple logistical questions before I leave you to our speakers. So please hold applause until each debater is done. So, speaking of applause, join me in welcoming Professor Weisberg.
Click harder.
When in doubt.
All right. Thank you very much, Alex. And thank you, Victor. And thank you to the Institute for inviting me. It's very exciting to be here. It's a wonderful organization. And I love that you're doing this. It's the Lord's work, if I may. And it really is great. I do think everyone to some degree, and some of us more, have interest in philosophy and in these big issues. And the more we talk about them, the better off we're going to be. So thank you. Okay, so I'm going to offer I feel like I'm already playing defense for various reasons. One, because we got the world record holder in the climb here. I mean, but anyways, I think that the view I'm presenting is unusual when you dig into it, and it requires defense. And so I'll give an optimistic defense of physicalism. We start out though with the idea of naturalism really first. And I think physicalism follows from it. Naturalism is the idea that, to some degree, science tells us what there is. And there's variations and different strengths of this. I opt for something that's, I think, more moderate. It's kind of a methodological principle that the best methods we have for finding out about the world are the methods, whatever they are, that one finds in the natural sciences. And that's a quote from a philosopher named Daniel Stoljar. Whereas physicalism is the idea that everything is made out of physical stuff. There is no extra stuff that is not physical. And people have written books about that definition. I'm not going to quibble about it. I think this gentleman kind of got it, this Democritus, allegedly, having a good time there, looks very happy, despite all there is atoms in the void. That's what we get from Democritus. And that there's nothing beyond that. Everything is made out of simple physical parts or some combination of them, and that's all there is the idea. Now, why think that? Well, if you're using the methods of natural science, the kinds of things you can get at are physical things, generally speaking. Not completely, maybe, but those are certainly the focal point. And one of the driving principles of science has very much been to limit its explanatory base, what it uses to explain, just to these little doodads, the forces that connect them, and how they glom together. And that's proven to be very powerful and very successful in certain domains. And then the idea of the naturalist is, oh, let's keep doing that. Let's keep doing that. Let's do that wherever we can. Now, some of the stronger versions of naturalism would say, and there's nothing else. It's sort of a grim kind of, if it's not science, consign it to the flames, sort of a thing David Hume sort of said. I don't hold that myself. I hold to a kind of humanism about things, and I'm open to these questions. But when we want to investigate the world, including the human being, the human person, and their minds, my attitude is approach it first with science and see how far we get. And why? Why would one want to do that? Isn't that already sort of, why are you being such a jerk? Why do you want to be all sciencey on us? I'll say more about why I like this view, but it's got success in other domains, right? So we want to see if we can extend that success farther than merely the things that people now all agree are physical, to include us. Now, as we'll see, this is what Francis Crick, the late Nobel laureate, calls the astonishing hypothesis. It's a radical idea, but anyways, that's where we're going. So if you're a naturalist, this certainly suggests physicalism, though there can be naturalistic dualisms for what it's worth. Some people have defended the idea that maybe there's some further property in the world, something non-physical that's connected by law to things that are physical. I myself reject that picture. I hold to this more narrow kind of picture that says there's just physical bodies and that's it. All right. Yeah, you just gotta push it harder. That's good. And also, you don't get to use these Renaissance, Enlightenment-looking pictures to make everything look exciting. That's a lovely picture by Vermeer. So why be a naturalist? I think it's a working hypothesis, right? It's not a creed. It's not a substitute for religion, or it needn't be. It could be, but to my thinking, it's an approach to understanding. It's a method And it's a working hypothesis, and that means something like you try it and you see how far you get, and if that doesn't work, then off you go somewhere else. And one of the key things I'm going to stress here about this naturalist picture is we just don't know yet what science can do. We don't know its limits. Each time you think you hit a limit in science, it tends to be some smart scientist in one of these buildings around here and others, and across the street, the medical center and all kinds of other places, figures out, oh no, we can get around that. We can get in there. We can figure out something to allow us to extend science where we didn't think it could go, right? And this success, in this project, that at various times in history where we thought we had hit a wall, we'd hit the edge of science, and that was the end of it, we then surpassed it. So the claim here of the physicalist, materialist about the mind is, yeah, we're going to do that for the human mind, that most mysterious of things, that most human of things, right? And, now, we don't know what the limits are, and now I call this optimism. Now, you might think this is like a grim kind of reductive, program. I'm an optimist that science can explain lots of things. I should mention at this point, sort of for full disclosure. So I was thinking, why do I believe this stuff? Now, the answer is pretty straightforward. My father was a scientist, a microbiologist. He worked on DNA. My mother is a secular humanist who went to secular humanist schools, ethical culture society schools in New York. So I was raised in an atheist science household. And so, of course, I believe this. It's, I came to it by argument. No, it was, mother's milk, as it were. But anyways, that being said, I think one can mount a kind of positive argument for it, as we'll see. But the optimism here, I do think there's good that happens when we understand how things work scientifically. That doesn't mean that humans will then use this knowledge for good, right? Famously, the second people learn something in science, they tend to make it into a weapon, right? We get it, or they monetize it in some. But look, understanding the world gives us control or power or understanding of it anyways. We grasp our world better. We can do things we couldn't do before. And so I think that's a positive. I think we're better off for having done that. So the more we know about ourselves in this way, the better off we'll be. And in the shadow of the medical center, you'd think, for reasons of health and well-being, and for who knows what else. I mean, you all have in your pockets, or nearby you, the Library of Alexandria times whatever, and you get annoyed when the search function doesn't go quick enough to quickly tell you the answer to whatever question you have in the world, or stream whatever movie, or see whatever, picture in whatever museum you want. It's just right there. We're just used to that now. And I'm going to claim that's because of naturalism, which is a bit of a stretch. Okay, so optimism about naturalism. Now do people know who that's Mr. Natural, so that's our crumb drawing. Kids these days don't know anything. Anyways, he looks very optimistic there, and maybe because he's been having fun in the 60s or whatever he was doing. So what is this kind of explanation we're talking about? Well, one of the key elements in the scientific revolution, interestingly, is mathematics, right? It's not simply, turning toward the world. It's actually turning toward this other realm, a realm that Alex, when he's not climbing walls, knows far better than I ever will, the world of mathematics. But the application of mathematics to nature in the hands of people like Galileo and Newton and many others has unlocked nature in many ways for us. Now, if you're going to put things into math, you got to turn them, as it were, into quantities. They've got to be things you can quantify and measure and relate in these mathematical ways. So the second you begin doing that, things like, values, qualities, how things look, the colors, all seem to be on shaky ground. What number is red? 48? 93? Just doesn't seem like the right kind of thing. And what is goodness? 22? The ratio of, you can try. But anyway, so that's one of the big problems I think that's here, is that when we mathematize nature, not everything can be mathematized. So what do we do about it? But the success of this is very powerful. Likewise, though, we have another element in science, which is experiment, right? And a very kind of precise observation that comes along with it. It's not just experiment. But experiment is one of the keys. So for things to be testable in experimental ways, they have to have causal impact. If there's no causal impact, you can't test it. So we're demanding that something be mathematizable and causally efficacious. It's got to have some impact. Sorry, I tend to wander around. If I leave the room, you can still hear me, right? Yeah. Like Aristotle. And so this has, again, it limits or it shapes the kind of phenomena and the way we think about the phenomena. If it's got to be mathematizable and it's got to be something that can be put into, experimental form, it's going to shape it. And then you might think, oh, well, how's that going to handle human emotions or experience or awe or the value or the transcendent experiences we have, right? That'll be the big question. But hey, there's been some success, right? Physics, chemistry, biology, neuroscience, technology. We could have put geology on there. I'm rereading one of my favorite all-time books, Annals of the Former World by John McPhee. If you want to read a book about geology that's beautifully written and gives you this experience of occasionally flashes of what geological time feels like, it's totally disconcerting how old the Earth turned out to be. This is one of the great discoveries in many ways, but it puts us in such a different frame. Anyways, all these things have led to technological success and advancements in various ways that have changed our world. And so, hey, let's keep going, like Mr. Natural here. Oh, see, I pushed too hard. But look, from the get-go, there's been this issue about how things appear, and how things appear really to common sense, ordinary understanding, and what science says. So this is nothing new. This problem I'm facing here in trying to claim that the mind is some kind of mechanical system or whatever I'm claiming, it doesn't sound right. But very often in science, things don't sound right. They don't seem intuitive, but they turn out to be provable or establishable in the way science establishes things, with experiment and prediction, but also with the advent of technology. So Copernicus claims that the Earth is in motion. And before Galileo gets going, it's sort of the way you refute Copernicus is, whoa, Copernicus, whoa, I'm moving, dude, right? And that worked until Galileo points out that what inertia is like. Right? If you're already in motion and nothing is acting upon you, you won't notice that you're moving. And maybe we're all moving, much like we're in an elevator, or you're flying in a plane, we're not ascending or descending. Likewise, the germ theory of disease. Who would have thought that little tiny invisible things could make you sick and be passed along to people? In fact, even after people had really established this, people refused to believe it. And it required the kinds of actions that we know about that have been controversial in other ways, but have prevented many, many people from getting sick. Now, Sir Arthur Eddington, the physicist and philosopher, noted that physics says this table is mostly empty space. The distance between the nucleus and the first shell of the electron, if the nucleus was the size of a basketball, it would be like the electron would be on the top of Rice Stadium if it was at the 50-yard line. So it's mostly empty. But come on. Surely that's as solid as anything is, right? No, science says, well, no, not exactly. So we're used to this idea that sometimes science overrides our intuitions about common, the way things are in our ordinary everyday understanding, right? So the philosopher Wilfrid Sellars, Pittsburgh University and other places, noted that this was a conflict between what's called the manifest image by Sellars, the ordinary ways of understanding things, and the scientific image. And one of the great tasks of philosophy, if you're into this naturalist stuff, is reconciling these images, right? So that's one of the big questions here. Now, moving to the actual claim to some degree. As I said, this is the astonishing hypothesis according to Francis Crick. Francis Crick, having discovered DNA and solved the problem of life, so he went on to something really hard, consciousness. And he apparently used to have in his lab, consciousness now, written on the wall. In the beginning of his 1991 book, The Astonishing Hypothesis, The Scientific Search for the Soul, he writes, the astonishing hypothesis is that your joys, your sorrows, your memories, your ambitions, your sense of personal identity and free will are in fact no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells. and their associated molecules. As Lewis Carroll's Alice might have phrased it, you're nothing but a pack of neurons. This hypothesis is so alien to the ideas of most people alive today that it can truly be called astonishing. And yeah, that's what I think. I think what we are, including all this stuff, is the result of the action of our neurons, of nerve cells in our brain. And that's it. No extra anything. Now, we shouldn't underestimate the staggering complexity of the brain. It's the most complex thing we know about in the universe, as far as I can tell, other than maybe groups of people with brains, right? Billions of neurons with trillions of connections modulated by hundreds of neurochemicals, all working in real time. It's what the neuroscientist Sherrington called the enchanted loom. It's a staggering thing. So we don't know how that works. One of my favorite things about this book is the chapter where he just says, here's all the stuff we don't know. And it's just huge gaps. And now that was 91, we've really made, I kind of think this, that give us a couple of 100 years before you start complaining about the failure of neuroscience, or a couple of 1,000 years, who knows? But anyways, this is the claim. And I'll say more about this in response to Alex. I think will make it easier to understand it. Now, here's things that you can do if you're a naturalist and you've got some problematic, recalcitrant experiences or phenomena that just don't seem to go away. Things that seem inexplicable or stop people from believing what you're saying. Well, one thing philosophers have done, and I don't find this particularly appealing, but in the good old or the bad old days, whatever it was of philosophy, they would say, oh, you're confused. You're using your words wrong. There's no problem there once you get all the words straight. So the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein said philosophy was a matter of therapy. Don't feel so bad, you're just confused. That's less appealing because you guys aren't confused. But look, here's the real move that you want to make. If you can, you want to reduce the phenomena that's big, complex, and unknown to smaller and simpler phenomena that are known. And ultimately, hopefully, boil it all the way down to the physical base that we want without any remainder. And so that, I think, is the way things will go if it works. But sometimes we will say, when faced with problems, you know, there really isn't that kind of thing there. Or the thing that people are looking for isn't there, but something nearby is there. And then the question might be, oh, do we get rid of it? There's no free will. There's no soul. There's no self. Or do we merely shift it and explain it in other terms? And I don't think there's a sharp line there. I think it sort of depends. Depends on where you start. And people start in different places. So one person's reduction might be someone else's elimination. Okay, I'm okay with that myself. But hey, here's the optimism. Until we're sure we can't explain, keep on trying. Keep on trucking, Mr. Natural might say. And that, of course, is ZZ Top's Eliminator album. You know, not Tres Hombres, but still pretty cool. Okay. Now, there are some of the problems that I face, or that Alex is going to bring up, which I think are problems of explanation in the scientific sense. We just don't know how to explain these things in scientific terms. Science falls short of explaining the phenomena. We miss what it is. But there's another lurking and much more important question here. And that I'm putting under the heading of normative. So the values, the meaning of life, the values we hold, what it means to be us as people, with, you know, in the real sense of people, not some robotic sense, what we really are. I say that as a humanist, that's what I think is central to what we are. So about these descriptive failures, and I'll talk some about the ones that Alex will present, I think, well, we have things we can say now, and they may be more or less convincing depending on where you start, but we're not done. And there I think, you know, we should retain our optimism and try to explain them in ways that we can. And maybe in the future we'll have better tools. But the bigger question is this second one, right? So science cannot adequately account for the normative features of reality. There, I think that might just be the way things are, right? This is, I think, maybe the human condition, as Sartre put it. This is where we are. Now, that may be an unhappy situation. Maybe that is not what we wanted, or not what we hoped and dreamed. But if we have reason to think it's true, then our job, our role here, is then to figure out how to live. But it was always that. We always had that problem. How do you live? Well, you can avail yourself to whatever tools you want. But here, if we know where we stand, I think it changes the picture. Now, I mentioned that my father was a scientist. My mother, as I mentioned, is a secular humanist to this day. She's 88 years old, still secular humanizing. And the motto of her elementary school was something like finding meaning in a godless world, some version of that. Now, the Ethical Culture Society, they don't think religion is a bad thing. They think it can be a force for good. And if it is, then it should be celebrated. So I share that feeling. I don't think that one needs to reject religion because one holds materialism. But one might have to think about it differently or something like that. Okay. Now, this is Rutger Hauer, right? As Roy Batty in the movie Blade Runner, who is a robot. He's a replicant, as the great Philip K. Dick wrote in his novella, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which was made into the movie Blade Runner. And he makes a speech at the end of his life where he has mercy for his enemy. And he talks about what will be lost when he stops existing. And to me, if that's not life, I don't kind of know what is at some level. What else do you have to do to show you have a soul? But he's all physical. He's merely, but now I'm just putting my cards on the table. So anyways, I just want to say why someone would go down this road, which looks like it has some grim existential ending, right? But I think there's hope here. I think this is the challenge of our lives, and this is why we think about this stuff. All right, I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Josh, for that presentation. And I'll hand it off to Professor Alexander Pruss.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here. Great pleasure to listen to Josh expound these lovely slides. And let's see, where are we? Here we are. So Josh talked about naturalism. There's alternatives to naturalism. One is there is no matter. There is just something spiritual. And matter is maybe something like an illusion. That's called idealism. I'm not going to be defending that. Another one is there is no matter, and there is no alternative to matter. There is nothing, and that's called nihilism. I can't defend that because I wouldn't be here if it was true. But the thing I want to defend is called dualism, right? So the idea there is that there's matter, but there is something else. Science that gives us a good story about what matter is like, but that's not all of reality. There's something else, and in human beings, there's something else has a responsibility for has some kind of responsibility for our thought, consciousness, and freedom. It might be a soul, for example. That's my preferred view. Okay, so I want to talk about a number of puzzling phenomena that human beings present that I think are problems for naturalism. Problems of meaning, consciousness, normativity, personal identity, and freedom. So let's start with meaning. So this is meaning in the humdrum sense in which words have a meaning, not sort of in the sort of deep meaning of life kind of sense, right? So these symbols here have a sense, right? They mean something. So now let's think about this. Here's a very plausible thing. A physical thing, like these kinds of signs that you might see, have a meaning because that meaning is assigned by something else that has a meaning. And I think this is very plausible that all physical things are like that. They get their meaning from other things. So somebody said, let's use this to mean stop. Well, they're saying it gave it meaning. But for that, they're saying their speech had to have a meaning too, right? So if all things of meaning are physical, and yet things that are physical get their meaning from something else, they don't have intrinsic meaning. Like symbols, no symbol has an intrinsic meaning. Like, so this is the letter S. It could have been the letter A. It could have been the number 4. It could have been a stop sign. So if physical things don't have a meaning on their own, they get a meaning from something else. There's two possibilities. we get an infinite regress of physical things, each one getting its meaning from another one. Now, sometimes when people talk about arguments for the existence of God, they wonder, was there in fact an infinite regress of causes? That's a non-issue here, because there is no regress of physical things with meaning, because there were no physical things with meaning more than, say, 5 billion years ago, before there was life on Earth. Physical things with meaning are associated with life. So there is no regress. So if there is no regress, we must somewhere come to a physical thing that got its meaning from something that isn't physical. Huh. So there's something not physical. What could it be? Maybe our minds, our souls give it meaning. Maybe something else, but it's something not physical. That's the first phenomenon. So here's a second thing. This is kind of, I think of it as sort of master argument, not at all original to me, but this is kind of what gets my intuitions going against naturalism. So I think science is great. I too have been raised in a sciencey household, but by Catholic scientists. So yeah, we're both sort of not sort of convinced by arguments initially, but we think that there's a lot to the arguments. So science studies intersubjective phenomena, things that you and I can both focus in on the same data point and observe. Consciousness is essentially a subjective phenomenon. I have mine, you have yours. They may be similar. I can talk about mine, you can talk about yours. You can understand mine by analogy to yours, but they are different phenomena. They are subjective phenomena. So they are beyond science. Science studies the intersubjective. Consciousness is not intersubjective. So here's a kind of way I think about this is, here's a picture of, 4 entities, and is there any way to scientifically tell which of these 4, if any, are conscious? Certainly not from the photos, not without further information, right? If you just have photos and you're an alien looking at these, you have no idea whatsoever. But could you look inside them, look inside what's going on here, look inside what's going on here, here, and here, and figure it out? I doubt it. In fact, I'm pretty confident you can't figure this out. I try to think of it like you're an alien, complete alien, you're trying to figure this out. I don't think you have a way. And even if you have some kind of hope, I think here's what you're going to do. You're going to start with yourself as an alien and think, which of these is most like me? And that's very subjective here. By the way, my view is that it's these 2 that have consciousness. But I wouldn't be completely surprised if there's some consciousness here. I doubt there would be here, but I'm not 100% sure either. Here's another sort of, this is a very standard argument due to the philosopher Frank Jackson. So we imagine somebody, Mary, who has no color sensors, no cones in her eyes, but she knows all of neuroscience and physics. So this is, of course, science fiction, right? Because nobody knows all of neuroscience and physics. But she does. There she is. And Jackson says, look, here's something she doesn't know about the world. Most of the people in this room can see red here. The colorblind maybe can see it a little differently, and maybe somebody has complete color blindness, they can't see it at all. But most people in this room can see sort of a standard red here. But Mary has no idea what that's like. What is that experience of the people who are seeing red? How is it different from those who see green? She cannot tell this. Yet she knows all of neuroscience and physics. And yet there's something she doesn't know. So neuroscience and physics isn't all there is. It's only a partial truth. The dualist might say, because they don't talk about souls, and so it's missing something. Yeah. So now I want to talk about 2 ways that, 2 sort of general approaches to what mind is from a naturalist angle. And the first is maybe a bit less popular these days, and I'll explain a little bit about why. This is biological theories. So in biological theories, the mind is tied to a very specific kind of physical thing, a brain, right? So a mind is a physical kind of organ of a special biological sort, namely a brain. I think this is problematic. First of all, think about the kinds of things that we have in other creatures on Earth. Octopuses. They're very smart. I think it's very, very plausible that they have minds. But do they have brains in the same sense as we do? Well, they have something inside them, not quite in their heads. They've got a decentralized system, but the system evolved independently from the system in our heads. It's highly decentralized. It probably functions rather differently, and it just is not the same organ. It's an analogous organ, but it's not the same organ. And so I conclude that because octopuses can think, and we can think, and yet they don't have the same biological organ, they've got a different kind, then thought cannot be linked to a specific organ. People talk of this as multiple realizability. Mind, we think, can be realized in a variety of different things. I don't know if there are any non-carbon life forms in the universe, but there might be. And if there are, they might be conscious. They might have minds, but they don't have brains, because brains are a specific organ of DNA-based life forms. The dualist can say, yeah, there's a reason why you can have multiple realizability. It's because souls can be found associated with many different kinds of bodies. You don't have to have a very specific kind of body. A lot of philosophers of mind, in response to thinking about things like this, have responded by moving to a theory that we call functionalism, and specifically computational functionalism. And there the idea is that what it is to think, what it is to have a mind, is to engage in the right kind of computation. Basically, it's to run the right software. And it doesn't matter what hardware you run it on, whether it's a human brain, whether it's an octopus brain, whether it's a silicon-based computer, it doesn't matter. As long as the software is doing the right thing, it's thinking. So I want to talk for a while about why I think computational functionalism, which I think is the naturalist's best hope, is unlikely to work. So this is the most famous argument against this view, and this is John Searle's Chinese room story. So remember, the story is the hardware doesn't matter, only the software matters. So let's imagine this is true. So a native speaker of Chinese is just a computational system. So is a native speaker of English, like Josh. So is a native speaker of Polish, like me. Persons are just computational systems. You can emulate a computational system in software, and it doesn't matter, according to functionalism, what hardware it runs on. The result, whatever software the Chinese speaker's mental software runs on, it's going to result in understanding of Chinese and consciousness. So here's Searle's great thought experiment. He says, okay, let's run the software on a human being, not on the brain of a human being, but on a human being as a whole. So specifically, we're supposed to imagine we've got this monolingual English office worker here who is in a room. He's got a notebook, he's got a pencil, and he's got and in that notebook are instructions of code written for what to do with inputs and outputs. And these instructions perfectly mimic the software in a native Chinese speaker's brain. As inputs, Bob gets a piece of paper with stuff written in Chinese. As outputs, he writes things with Chinese letters. And he just has these instructions, and they say things like, when you see this shape, make this note in your little notepad. If you've just seen this shape, and on page 17 of your notepad you have this shape, then turn to page 80 and draw this shape. And if on this page you have this shape, and on this page you have this shape, then draw this shape and put it in the output bin. It's just, he's all the time shuffling paper and following all of that. And Searle says, he doesn't understand what he's doing. He doesn't understand Chinese when he's doing that. He's just shuffling paper. But if functionalism is right, then Bob, together with his notebook and together with his pencil, understands Chinese. Not Bob alone, it's Bob with notebook and pencil. Understands Chinese and has a consciousness of interacting in Chinese. I think that's just wrong. You pass Bob a note in Chinese that says that his wife died, and he's going to give you back a note saying how sad he is, but he's just going to be just as bored. And Bob plus notebook plus pencil is not going to be any sadder than that. So I think functionalism is false. I think, and as a dualist who actually believes in souls, I want to say there is only one soul there in that whole room, and it's the soul of Bob, and that soul doesn't do the Chinese language processing. The Chinese language processing is not tied to any consciousness. It's not really understanding. Okay, here's another thing that I think naturalism has a lot of trouble with. Science talks about how things really are, but not about how they should be. But there are many normative facts. So normative facts are facts about how things should be. And there are many normative facts about us. Here are some. Our beliefs should reflect reality. We should follow the evidence when we are thinking about things. We should not violate the laws of thought in our the laws of logic in our thoughts. Or sort of more deeply, we all have equal dignity and should be treated in accordance with equal human rights. I think these are all true things about us. But they're true things about us that do not have a scientific explanation. I want to focus in on the last one of these, dignity, right? If we are purely physical beings, we are continuous with other animals. And we are discontinuous with other animals in dignity. Other animals are important, they need to be treated well, but they don't have dignity. They don't have fundamental rights. It would be wrong to kill one human being to use their organs to save 5 human beings. That is because that one human being has dignity. It is not wrong, I think, to kill one chimpanzee to save 5 chimpanzee lives, on the other hand, or to save 2 human lives. Humans have a dignity. There's a discontinuity between us and the animals. And yet, biologically, we're continuous. So I think there's more than biology to us. Let's try this argument. So this is personal identity of a sort. This is an argument by Dean Zimmerman. So let's try this. Suppose I am purely physical. And what am I? As Josh said, right, physicalism is the idea that there's atoms in the void. Presumably, like the arrangement of the atom, the void matter sort of is not what I am. I am a bunch of atoms on this story. So I'm a bunch of atoms. I'm a cloud of atoms. Lots and lots of them, right? Something like, something of the order, 1 order of magnitude more than Avogadro's number. So really big number of atoms. And I have, at least Google says, about 300 million skin cells. Okay, so I'm a cloud of atoms and I have 300 million skin cells. And none of them really matter that much individually to my mental functioning. Now, if you destroyed all of my skin cells, I'd be in horrible pain and wouldn't live very long, and my mental functioning would be affected. But any one of my skin cells, you could do pretty much anything to, and I probably wouldn't even notice. So I have about 300 million of them, right? Okay, so now here's the Dean Zimmerman's thought experiment. Take each of my 300 million skin cells, let's call one of these skin cells X, this little circle here, and consider another atom cloud that's in the same place as I am. And it's this me minus that skin cell. Okay, so there's a cloud of atom that's just like me, cloud of atoms that's just like me. It's in fact right here, but it's missing one of the skin cells. There are 300 million atom clouds like that just where I am. There's the one with all of my skin cells. There's the one without this one, the one without this one, the one without this one, and so on, right? So let's call these one of these where X is the skin cell I don't count as Pruss minus X. There are 300 million such things right here, and they all run the same software. Well, I mean, this software doesn't run on the skin cells even. But you could probably do this with brain cells too. Just removing one cell is not going to significantly affect the functioning. But I'm doing it with skin cells to make it even clearer. So there's 300 million things right here. And they all function in exactly the same way. So according to functionalism, they run the same software. They think the same thoughts. They're conscious of the same things. They are all aware of seeing all of your faces. They're aware of hearing my voice reverberating off the walls. They're all doing exactly the same thing. So you might have thought, previous to this talk, that there's just one person on stage right now. But in fact, there's at least 300 million, assuming naturalism, it looks like. 300 million clouds. In fact, way more than that, because you take away 2 cells and it's still going to be about the same. So that's 300 million squared options for that. So, okay. All right, so that's just kind of strange. But as Josh very nicely said in his opening, science sometimes does tell us that reality is surprising, that reality is very different from how it initially seems. And I think that's a really valuable point. And so the fact that it's just kind of strange that this is so, I think doesn't really do that much. But I think it has ethical consequences. Some of us have more skin cells than other people. Namely, the larger of us have more skin cells. So wherever there's a larger person, there are more people. There are more clouds of atoms that function in exactly the same way. So if I'm thinking of, 2 people are drowning and one has twice the surface area of the other, there's way more conscious people where there's the one of the larger surface area. And I mean, it's more than proportional to the surface area because you could take out multiple cells. And so it seems like you get from this view that where you have that bigger people sort of deserve more consideration. Because when you help a bigger person, you help more people at the same time. It's not like each of those people is equal, maybe, but there are many more of them. And so just like if pressing one button lets you save 600 million people and pressing another button lets you save 300 million, it's easy to see what you should do. Everything else being equal. I mean, maybe it's 600 million Hitlers, that might be different, but other things being equal, it doesn't matter much. So you go for the more numbers. So it's very hard, I think, on naturalism to delineate where the boundaries of human beings are and to count them. A dualist, on the other hand, can say, look, there's just one soul there, and there's a fact as to which atoms it is attached to in its mysterious soulish way. This is a very naive kind of argument. Tons and tons of stuff is written on it. So this is something we can have a good discussion during the Q&A, or perhaps Josh picks up on this. It's a very quick thing. If I'm purely physical, all my actions are the result of the laws of physics governing the motion of particles in my brain. I don't control the motions of particles in my brain. I don't control the laws of physics. So I don't control my actions. So I'm not responsible for anything on naturalism. Or so it seems. Again, lots and lots has been written on this. Naturalists have stories to tell. I think there is a problem. Okay, so each of these phenomena points towards there being something in our minds that goes beyond the world of science. And dualists agree. They say science is great, science gets a lot of things right, but there's phenomena that go beyond it. And these problems are so big that a number of naturalists just end up denying some of the phenomena. Rosenberg denies that there are thoughts. Frankish that they're subjective sensations. The early Unger ended up denying that he himself existed. He was impressed by something similar to the cloud of atoms argument, not exactly the same one, and he concluded he didn't exist. This is very extreme. I think it is better to say exist, but we're not just physical. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. So let me hand it on to Josh.
All right. Wow. Thank you very much, Alex. See here. Reply. This should. Right. Let me start this. You know, we need to imagine Sisyphus happy. Anyways, so I hope it's not so Sisyphusian here, but these are a quick just recap there of some of the things Alex touched on, and obviously, as he mentioned, these are big issues that you all have heard about and have thought about, and philosophers have spilled enough ink to fill oceans about from the beginning of philosophy and so forth. But hey, that's why we're here, so let's give it a go. Now, the issues about meaning, and so this is the stuff about consciousness and about the Chinese room meaning stuff, and the meaning argument he gave at the beginning. I take those to be, as it were, descriptive problems, as I mentioned. It's sort of, science just can't explain how these things got here. And it's not about the normativity stuff he discussed at the end, which I already said I think is more serious. And so Alex says, a physical thing, text, sound, brain state, this is a quote from his presentation, only has meaning if that meaning was assigned by something else that has meaning, and we saw the stop sign and the yield sign and so forth. Well, it seems to me that there are stories to be told about how these things might have evolved, right? And here I'm following a range of philosophers in the naturalist camp. For me, Fred Dretske, the late great Fred Dretske, and Ruth Millikan is another, who try to argue that these things can evolve because there's information in the natural world to be had. And once that's there and you get critters that evolve, they can use that information to achieve their goals of surviving, reproducing, etc. So this bottom thing is a fine-grained look at what part of a bacteria called a magnetosome. They can detect magnetic fields. They use this magnetic field detection to get them away from oxygen. They're anaerobic. They roll, they do this cool, like, rah, oxygen, ah, and they roll off. Now, people like Dretske and Millikan argue that's the beginning, right? You have a critter there, and it dies if there's too much oxygen. Some mutation occurs in its genetics such that this system is present. We can talk about that story. Obviously, that's maybe part of the issue here. And that system then achieves the goal of getting this critter away from oxygen. So there's a sense in which the signal of the magnetic means oxygen here. And we build on that up and up and up as we go. That's the idea for the naturalists. There was no understander, no meaner. There was survival of something once life begins. And then there's the exploitation of information in the environment. And then you stack that up. You pile that on top of each other. And then ... you get to us. Okay, right, we know that's a big step to take. But you can see, I think, in this kind of story, the beginnings of these things. And that, for the naturalists, is a big deal. Now, the other thing I have up there is a nudibranch. How cool is that? Such a nicer name than the sea slug. The great Nobel Prize-winning neuroscientist Eric Kandel studied these creatures. Kandel, he's a wonderful writer about these things, really the father of cognitive neuroscience. He wanted to be a Freudian analyst, having been born in Vienna. You're supposed to be if you're born in Vienna. But when he got to the US, and his family escaped, he went and said to the analysts, hey, I want to study the brain scientifically to prove Freud is right. And they looked at him like, kid, we don't do that. So he went into neuroscience. Now, being iconoclastic, when he went into neuroscience, he was looking for a model to study. And he found an animal with a very simple nervous system, and he said, I'll study that. And the neuroscientists around him said, kid, what are you doing? No one wants to be the king of the sea slugs, right? This is not a job you want. He said, no, I'm going to do it. I'm going to find out how these things work. And what he discovered in the brains, really the simple nervous system of these creatures, that their neurons are altered by the presence of the molecule glutamate, which affects the synaptic connections. And because of that, they can learn. And he showed that they could learn associative Pavlovian learning, which is a mind-boggling thing to me. But anyway, he showed how the neurons in this creature did that. And then his advisor said, well, okay, now what, kid? And he said, I'm going to find that in humans. And they said, good luck. And then he did. And he won the Nobel Prize for medicine. So, all right, this is how associations in the world are made. We know the chemical system, the biological system, that detect things that are important, that have feedback from the environment. And in that way, things become meaningful. The bell means food. So anyways, I don't see how, now, this is the beginning of a story, right? This is where I get to play my, don't ask me the real details because we're not done yet card, which I think is not unreasonable here, but we've made some progress. And I think you can see the shape of where this might go. So meaning might get into the world that way. Now, consciousness. Here I play on the title of Daniel Dennett's optimistic, as my great aunt would say, he has chutzpah to say, consciousness explained. He knew that would sell books. Anyways, this is a lovely image of a little part of a mouse brain, mouse cortex. And the complexity is staggering, right? Anyways, but we have some idea about how these things work. But now to address some of these famous philosophical arguments that Alex brings up. The subjective-objective thing, that I attribute to my undergraduate teacher, Thomas Nagel, in his famous paper, What Is It Like to Be a Bat? Where he's wondering how we could ever figure that out. And he makes this point about the subjective and the objective, they're on a continuum, and sort of if you go from one toward the other, you lose the subjective if you move toward the objective, so you'll never get it in there. I've never been blown away by that one myself. It seems to me the possibility exists that something that is indeed subjective, we don't have to deny it, unlike Alex Rosenberg or Keith Frankish, might also be known objectively. We might come to know that this is the system in us that works when we have subjective experience. Now, of course, notice, I agree to some degree that starting with aliens looking at us, we might not be looking for that kind of thing if we were those aliens, but we're not, we're us. We know we have conscious experience, and we know that these brain areas light up, quote unquote, when we have those experiences. We know that these things happen to our conscious experience when we manipulate these parts of our brains in various ways. For example, if one takes a mind-altering chemical, which interestingly, every human culture finds that. I still can't get over that one. That's one of my favorite facts. Wherever you go, there's someone like, oh, look, rotting grape juice. Let's get Johnny to drink. Oh, I mean, from that to ayahuasca, right? So it's pretty impressive. Why? Because those chemicals, which are psychoactive chemicals, interact with our neurons and alter our experience. So there are ways for us to get from the subjective to the objective and to connect them. It's only if we think the subjective by its nature is only one way knowable, can only be known in one way, from the first person. But that's not the way to do science, I don't think. You can only do science if you can see something yourself. There's lots of things that we talk about in science that are not observable in this way. For example, electrons. Can't see them. We think they're there because they're part of a theory that explains things that we can see, that explains various phenomena. Right? So now we posit something about the brain doing consciousness. It makes predictions about how we can manipulate it. It makes predictions about things we wouldn't expect. And then we test it. And then we might know, yeah, we're getting, well, maybe not all the way there, but closer. Maybe we can begin to know the outlines of subjectivity objectively. How far can we go? I don't know. Be optimistic, maybe all the way in there. Maybe one day we'll be able to plug into our, you know, our brain ports, whatever they're got coming. It'll probably be wireless, right? Well, it's put in the thing and boop, okay, bat, click. Oh, wow. And now you might say, well, how do you know if it's right? Well, there's a whole science of that. Chiroptery, and there's a bunch of comparative neuroanatomy and a range of other things. Can it do nothing? Where's the wall? Now, Nagel himself admits that, yeah, I can understand other people. He's actually aware of this because he's worried about Wittgenstein saying you can't have a private language, but whatever. I can understand you guys because I'm close enough to you guys. So when you say something about your experience, I can, by analogy, map it to mine. Here's a question. Who gets in that group? Who's close enough? Maybe that's a changing boundary. Maybe as we come to understand other animals and other systems, aliens, machines, et cetera, better, we'll come to understand their subjectivity too, at least possibly. Anyways, I'm kind of just making a speech, obviously. I guess I am making a speech, I mean, that's why I'm here. But I mean, you know, I'm not offering new facts there. I'm just saying I don't see why the boundary is so sharply drawn now that we know we can't get there. How far do you got to get? Here again, science, maybe it did in the beginning with Newton. They were looking for certainty so they could stand up to religion and be an equal partner in knowledge. But over the 1700s, over the 18th century, it's become much more apparent that science is not infallible. It is not giving you that kind of knowledge. It's fallible theoretical knowledge. So we can have a theory, see how far we get. It won't be perfect, but that counts for something here. Okay. Now, functionalism and multiple realizability. Well, I think that's right. I think that lots of different things can have minds. It depends on what you do, not what you're made of. So I think that's right as a point here. What about Mary and her facts? I want to say the same kinds of things about Mary as I want to say about Nagel. I think they're running the same argument. But just note about Mary, and Alex did note it. The claim is Mary knows all of science, all of it, completed at the end. Daniel Dennett, who's Nagel's great interlocutor and the villain in many of these pieces, argued, look, here's what might happen when you give Mary all this information in her black and white room. She'll say, yeah, I understand red. Yeah, I know what red's like. Yeah, 100%. And you might say, how could you know that? And she says, I know all of science. Do you? And then it just kind of drops his mic and walks off at that point. Anyway, I'm not saying this is yet really an argument. It's just we don't yet know. Now, Searle, I think Searle is making a mistake in that he's putting himself in the middle of a system that the larger system has understanding, at least potentially. So I don't see why merely being in the middle of a complex system is enough to show that the system itself doesn't understand. Okay, but does this mean that, you know, the book and the room and him and understands? Well, yeah, I think there's some level at which the functionalist is going to have to bite that bullet. If you can do the right job functionally, you can produce from the right inputs the right kind of outputs, you're in. You have a mind. And that entails you could have weird systems like this, maybe understanding. But look, in all practical purposes, this cannot be done, right? For him to do anything like that, the bored office worker, it would take like longer than the universe will ever exist to get one. You know, there's some crazy number to do a single hand simulation of a machine that can pass the Turing test. It just takes forever. So it's got to be really fast. It's got to be in real time. It's got to produce the right answers. It's got to be flexible. All these things. Now, if I meet some system and it can talk to me and it explains who it is, and I learn that inside there's a little guy shuffling papers, I'm not sure how impressed I'd be. Like, oh, that's interesting. Wow. But, you know, I'm already down the rabbit hole with robots. So, you know. Anyways, the bottom line here is I think give us a bit of time. There's much more to be said about these topics, okay? So I'm happy to talk more about them than this hand wavy thing. All right, oops, I have this. Finally, the deeper question, again, as I said at the end of my talk, I think these are the big challenges. The meaning of life stuff, not the meaning of signs. Finding freedom and dignity and value amongst atoms in the void is the challenge for the materialist. But I think those things can be answered by people and how they interact and the purposes we have in this world here. We should be good to each other. We should do the right thing. We should care for each other. We find meaning in our lives when we do that. I'm channeling my mom here. I'm trying. Judy Weisberg. Shout out to Judy Weisberg. You know, but I was brought up this way, yes, but I think that's right. If what makes you do good to others now is that you believe in an afterlife and a savior, great. If you don't, that's fine too. Just do the right thing. Also, we get meaning from art, we get meaning from music, we get meaning from camaraderie and fellowship like we have here. These things are meaningful because we're here doing it. Right. I'm making speeches again, but hey. Could we naturalize the soul? I mean, so I'll be honest. I don't get Dean Zimmerman thing. Look, this microphone is made out of atoms, right? So if there are 300 microphones, I don't, there's an identity claim about what a microphone is that you have to solve first, or a chair, or a ship, like one you call the ship of Theseus. I mean, you have to solve that problem, then you'll know what a thing is. Apply it to us. So I'm just not sure what to do with that one. I don't. Anyways, but the soul, I think, look, you have a soul because of who you are, what you do, the beliefs you have, the values you hold, because you're a person. Could that be a natural thing? Could it have evolved? I think yes. And I don't think there's more to it than that. Is that enough? I don't know. I think that's what there is. Now, about animals, I think we're altering our views about this. I think the things Alex said about animals, I'm a little less, anyways, my line is less sharp. I mean, it's partly my Darwinian thinking about evolution, but it's partly just, I think that's the way we think. I think, anyways, the way I think, the royal we thinks, that we are continuous with animals and they do have value and they do have dignity. I mean, my dog Butters doesn't have that much dignity when she's eating garbage off the table, but she's got some dignity, right? And we love them for that reason. Now, they're not the same as people. That's exactly right. Now, what accounts for the difference? Now, I think it's the complexity and the power of our psychology and our power as groups. As we are the most incredible social animal. We are born and built to live with each other and to interact with each other. And that's different than other animals, most of them. So anyways, what about faith and the limits of understanding? We don't know how far we're going to get, and we never will. What do? I think faith is very important. What do you have faith in? Well, you've got to find that out for yourself. Investigate these things. That's why we're here, right? So I really hope, sincerely, that materialism, physicalism doesn't somehow cut that off, and I don't think it does. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Josh. We'll get a reply from Alexander Pruss.
Thank you, Josh. And just to be clear, our replies are replies to our initial thing. So this is not a reply to what Josh just said, but to what he said about half an hour ago. Okay, so Josh highlights optimism about science, right? Optimism that we're going to get informative scientific explanations about all of reality. And this hope is grounded in the impressive successes that science has had over the last couple hundred years. And I love these successes, but I want to point out something about how they were achieved. I think they were achieved by limiting the domain of science to the physical, the objective, and the descriptive. And in fact, I think that's why suddenly science took off, or one of the reasons it took off so quickly and moved so fast is because it limited its domain. It didn't go into things that were beyond its capacity. It's not a bad thing about science. This is what makes science work. It's not a bad thing about biology that it doesn't talk about stars. If it did, it would get distracted. But nonetheless, there are domains of knowledge that go beyond science. And science, I think, depends on these. And this is what I want to focus on, is the way that science depends on things that are beyond science. I talked a lot about consciousness already, and Josh responded to this. I want to talk about this. I'll say a little bit about mathematics, a little bit about rationality, ethics, and then ultimate origins. I think those are all questions on which we can make a little bit of progress, but not by scientific methods. So let's start with mathematics. So Galileo very famously wrote that the book of nature is written in mathematical language. He specifically said language of geometry. And modern science, as Josh pointed out, presupposes mathematics, depends on mathematics, is mathematical. I think besides the limiting aspect of not getting distracted with investigating things like purposes and things that go beyond science, the mathematics is, I think Josh is right, the thing that made science work in the last couple hundred years. But I want to point to a mystery about mathematics. I've thought for a while that mathematics is very queer because there's something very strange. So if we look at what areas of human knowledge we're most sure of, mathematics is way up there. Maybe it's the very top. Maybe some religious people will say theology is higher, but pretty much everyone will agree it's either the first one or the second highest thing there is in terms of how sure we are. We're way more sure of mathematics than of geology, physics, biology, these kinds of things. And we've been sure about the mathematics for a long time, right? So you've got people doing mathematics 2,500 years ago, and pretty much what they did was right. But the science they did, so much of it was just completely wrong. So we get the mathematics, we're quite sure about it, but that's the first part of the strangeness of mathematics. But there's a second part. The second part is we have very little idea of what the mathematics is about. So we have known for 2,500 years or so that there are infinitely many prime numbers. We still have very little idea of what numbers are, prime or not, right? So on the other hand, in biology, in geology, we have a pretty decent sense of what we're talking about, but we're not sure that it's not quite as sure that it's true. So very strange. In mathematics, we're sure it's true, but we don't know what it means. But I think we can say a little bit about it. It's abstract, and it goes beyond the physical. The mathematical statements are not statements about the physical world. The statement that there are infinitely many prime numbers is not a statement about there being infinitely many, piles of pebbles that have some property. For all we know, the universe is finite. It might not be, may or may not be. Science hasn't told us yet, but mathematics is about the infinite, and it's about the non-physical. The numbers are not physical things. So here's connecting with mind. We have this question. If mathematics is about things that are not physical, how do we know it? How do we know the basic axioms of mathematics, like that if x plus 1 is y plus 1, then x is y? If they concern infinite non-physical domains and we're merely physical. And we have a second puzzle, which is why it is that mathematics, in fact, applies to the physical world. Second part, rationality. Rationality, I think, deals with should. We should typically believe what our best science tells us. Right? I just said that. I think that's true. Typically, we should believe what our best science tells us. But this should claim is true. But science doesn't tell us this claim. Science doesn't tell us should claims, and yet it's true. It's true, but it's normative, so it goes beyond the domain of science. Likewise, I don't think science tells us how we should weigh evidence, how we should fit theories to data. Those are philosophical kinds of questions that I don't think are settled by scientific discovery. Yet there's objective truth there. It's not something we have created. We haven't put meaning on the world. If we did that, then our science wouldn't be objective in the way that it is. Scientific objectivity, I think, requires that there be facts about how we should reason, how we should think about the world. And these facts are not facts that science discovers because they are should facts. Ethics. This is sort of maybe the most obvious kind of thing, right? So we can ask, why bother doing science at all? Well, extends our lives, right? Reduces suffering, enhances our ability to act in the world, gives us knowledge. Okay. Yeah, it does all those things. But why are those things worth doing? Why is it worth extending our lives? Why is it worth reducing suffering? I cannot, so I don't, let me start with this claim. I cannot imagine a scientific discovery that would tell us that we should reduce pain. I can imagine lots of scientific discoveries that tell us how to reduce pain. There have been lots of them. Our lives have much less pain in them because of it. But no scientific discovery that we have ever made, I think, has told us that we should reduce pain, and no scientific discovery will ever tell us this. And the same goes for the other things that are worthwhile about science. They're not things that we can expect future science to deliver on, to tell us that, yeah, we should enhance our agency. Knowledge is a good thing. That's not what science talks about. And so I think if all we have is naturalism, we don't really have a reason to pursue science or to do anything else. And of course, science without ethics is scary. Let me move on to the last thing. So this is moving beyond mind. And I was initially going to just talk about human beings and naturalism about human beings. And I think the rationality and the ethics is human ethics, human rationality. But Josh also, in his initial talk, talked of naturalism in general. There's nothing in the universe other than atoms in the void. So I wanted to address that to some degree. So we could ask questions like, why is there a physical reality at all? Why are there atoms in the void? Maybe even we could ask why there's a void. I'm not sure. That depends on on whether you think the void is really something. The ancient atomists, by the way, actually did. They actually thought it was something. And relativity theory, I think the analog to the void is something like a curved space-time. And since it's curved, it's got to be something. It's got to have some kind of reality to it. So I think that there's a fair question, not just about why the atoms are there, but why the void's there. Science explains physical things in terms of other physical things. And because of that, all its explanations presuppose that there is something physical. And then explain new physical things. Okay, if this is how things were 14 billion years ago, this is how they will be 13 billion years ago, and this is how they'll be 12 billion years ago, and blah, blah, blah. This is how they will be now. But science always has to start with some physical state and explains further physical states in terms of this. It cannot thus explain why there is anything physical at all. Scientific explanations make use of laws of nature. But why are there laws of nature? And why are they, at least the fundamental ones, simple enough for us to discover? They're lovely. They're at least the ones, our best guesses at them have tended to involve beautiful mathematical equations that we find lovely. Why should there be this? Why should the fundamental laws of nature be so lovely? And again, I don't think this is something science could possibly explain, because scientific explanations are explanations which say, given that the laws of nature are thus and so, here's what follows. But now we're asking, why are there laws of nature that are thus and so? There's another sort of simple kind of thought, fairly naive kind of thought, but so on naturalism, I guess our best naturalistic story is that 14 billion years ago, the universe popped into existence out of nothing. Maybe there's some kind of further story. But at the end, what you're going to have is basically something popping into existence out of nothing, or having always existed for no reason at all. But let's ask this question: why should I think that the whole universe popped into existence 14 billion years ago, rather than that the solar system popped into existence 5 minutes ago? You might think, which one would be easier? Well, you might think if we were going into business of things popping into existence, when you've got less energy popping into existence, it's easier. The solar system has less energy than the universe as a whole. Things that have a higher degree of order, you think, are less likely to pop into existence. The initial entropy of the universe is incredibly low. Again, puzzling, but there's amazing order in the solar system, like brains and things like that, but apparently the order in the initial low entropy of the universe is actually even more orderly. So you might think either you cannot compare and say one is more likely than the other. That's actually my own view, is you can't compare these things popping into existence saying which is more likely. Or you have to say that the whole solar system popping into existence 5 minutes ago is more likely. But both of these hypotheses lead to exactly the same observations for us. We wouldn't see, so when I say the solar system pops into existence, that includes it pops into existence together with photons that we think are traveling from outside the solar system. But on this hypothesis, they're not. So I think if it just popped into existence, there's no reason to prefer the 14 billion year hypothesis to the 5 minute hypothesis. But there is. And it's, I think, a fact about rationality, at least, that we should prefer the 14 billion year one. But it's a puzzling fact on naturalism, because it seems like the other popping is, if anything, easier. Okay, so I think science made enormous progress, but it did so at a cost to science, namely limiting its domain. And this is a cost well worth paying. Specialization is really worthwhile. And my own view is that in the end, the best explanation for an optimistic outlook on why science works is that we have simple, elegant laws of nature that were put there by a being beyond us, like God, who loves mathematics and wants us to be able to know the universe. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. So now we will proceed to our Q&A. So both of our presenters will take a seat. Let me hand you, Alex, the mic. And I see that a number of people have been submitting questions through their QR code on your phone. So feel free to continue to submit more questions if you like. So I'll go ahead and take a seat here. So maybe we'll start here with a question for Josh.
Okay, I'm ready.
There we go. I'll fire away. So this student asks, this is actually one of our HI regulars, does the naturalistic view of metaphysics imply a naturalistic basis for ethics? So he says, for example, utilitarianism. So maybe a way of thinking about the question is, it's like, hey, what does naturalism have to tell us or not about ethics?
Yeah, that's a great question. So some views in ethics they start with naturalism and they try to then make their views fit. And certainly John Stuart Mill and Bentham's utilitarianism certainly looks like it fits the bill. It defines good in terms of pleasure or lack of pain, and bad in terms of pain and lack of pleasure, and then argues that a good act maximizes the good and a bad one avoids the pain and minimizes the bad. So that would fit. Now, famously, there's a counter argument that, oh, that's the naturalistic fallacy. We can ask, well, why is pleasure good? And we don't seem to have that answer. It's just it's sort of stipulated that way, and it seems to leave open the question of whether it's good or not, which then we're back to square one. So my own view is, as a naturalist, if I'm going to say something about morality, it better fit. And I think that's a challenge. My own thinking is that there might be something to the idea that there's a state that's best for people to be in, some kind of flourishing, a eudaimona, to take the Aristotelian idea, that is our best state to be in, and we should try to get there. What that state is something to be discovered. Is that enough to be good? Well, here you might wonder what the word good means, and this is one of the big debates in metaethics. Whether it's something sort of defined as being beyond the natural, in which case, and of course it doesn't get there. And all I'm giving you is something less, or something not even related. Or you might say, well, no, the good really means okay, and then we're playing this game of defining the good. And it's a difficult game, I agree. Now, it looks to me like the prior commitment to naturalism is pushing things around there. Now, I retain my optimism, or maybe the word naive should be put in there. Fine, naive optimism that there is a way to make this all fit. Or maybe that's my faith, that I have faith that there's some way, and that's the best I can do there.
That's great, thank you. This is a question for Alex. So, by the way, the question's on my phone, I'm not texting. So, how does dualism deal with the interaction between mind and matter?
This has always been, or since Descartes' time, it's been one of the big problems. So if we have souls and we have free will, how do they affect how do the souls affect the physical world? I think this is a problem that both the naturalist and the dualist have, but in different ways. For the dualist, it looks to me more like a empirical problem, namely, how do we fit in with our scientific understanding of how brains work, this idea that some events in the brain apparently are caused by something that is not physical. What's going on there in the brain that does that? Perhaps one day we'll discover it. Perhaps this is a place where the dualist can just say, be optimistic about science. Say, we will maybe one day discover, hey, you're doing these neural scans, and when people are making complex moral decisions, and we cannot predict from the underlying physics the observations that we make about how the brain is actually functioning. We are nowhere close to being able to do this kind of fine-grained analysis that we would be able to say either way, whether these specific decisions that people make can be predicted from the physics or not. So this is a question for future science, whether we can do that. So the dualist might have to stick their neck out and say, okay, if my theory is right, there's something odd that we will one day discover going on in the brain. I don't think that's a bad thing to stick one's neck out like that, because we don't know what science will bring us. It may bring us that. That's not the only possible answer. You might have you might think that free will is linked to quantum indeterminism of a sort that the events are physically, in principle, unpredictable, but that still has empirical consequences, because it might turn out that quantum events are not very important to the brain's functioning. That, I believe, is still empirically an open question whether they are. So there's still some sticking out of the neck on the part of the dualist. But I said that the physicalist, I think, has also a problem, but it's more of a conceptual problem. If all we have are atoms and the void doing their complex computational stuff, how does that count as a choice? And that's not so much, I think, an empirical question as a conceptual one. Given what these things are like, why is that counted like a choice? It looks like just billiard balls pushing each other around. Yeah,
sure, please.
All right. It's also weird that you guys have to text and we can just talk. Sorry. Suckers.
Helps us keep it manageable.
So I very much like the dualism question. Thank you for that, whoever That's awesome. Which of course is one of the great challenges, but Alex is quite right. All sides have their challenges here. So it's worth mentioning that in this domain, naturalists tend to then argue for some weaker version of freedom, what we call compatibilism, that freedom isn't about this sort of uncaused or outside cause or whatever, a real choice in the sense that Alex just mentioned, but is something weaker. And that may be a disappointment, but it's supposed to somehow preserve enough of the structure whereby we can then account for responsibility, we can account for a difference here. That so long as no one is coercing you, is forcing you to do something, and you're doing it in the normal way, whatever that is, it's a free act. Now you might say, but the normal way is merely atoms and billiards, and yeah, okay, that's all we ever meant. And so it is a conceptual idea. It is not something that drops out of science. It's some philosophical apology or defense for science or whatever, for what we're left with on the scientific picture. But many people have made this case or tried to. I should also point out a worry that free will has been a problem from the get-go before people were worried about this problem. One might wonder whether God knows what you're going to do tomorrow and so forth. So free will is not, free lunch for anyone, I think. Well,
that's great.
Next question is.
Yeah, actually, the next question is for you, Josh. So this is, in effect, asking you to reply to one of the issues that Alex brought up earlier. So how can purely material minds contemplate mathematics? So some of the points that Alex was making about infinities and stuff like that.
And I hate to keep saying that, that's one of the big questions. So in the philosophy of mathematics, so from a philosophical perspective, there are philosophers who have tried to argue that there are ways that this can be done. Maybe the philosopher Paul Benesaref is a big figure here who thought there was somehow we could access structures in reality that somehow indicated how then to expand outward. One of my teachers in grad school, Hartree Field, now at NYU, argued for a kind of naturalism, a kind of fictionalism, that somehow there's some story that we're able to tell ourselves about these things. Working first from ordinary physical quantities, we can extend outward and then make some kind of mental leap, which involves, I'm not convinced by these things. I don't think any of them are well established in any sense. I do think this is one of the big questions. I, at some level, follow one of my philosophical heroes, Willard Van Orman Quine, who just says, hey, science needs it. If science needs it, it exists. And so he allows abstract objects to exist. Okay, now we've got concreta here in the world and abstracta. Does that give us, though, the dualism that Alex is? I don't think so. I think it just gives us mathematical objects. Now, how do we access them? I still haven't answered that question. That's a good question. I tend to think of these things in terms of the rules of games. You learn a rule of a game and you can sort of see it keeps going. Whatever that is, see it keeps going. ... Our minds can understand that. And we can sort of then keep doing that. We can iterate it. And that allows us then to understand a sequence like that. So a great question, unanswered, but good question. If you want to beat me up about
That's okay.
So this next one is for Alex. So within dualism, when in the history of human evolution did the first entity with a soul come into being?
Wasn't that on day? Wait.
So
We're into hard questions tonight.
So actually, for me, it's not a hard question at all. I mean, on my own view, it's just, I know this is going to sound incredible. On day one of life, as soon as I think life requires something like a soul. Life, as soon as you have life, you have things that are sensitive to what is good and what is bad. They carry information about the environment, and information is not just the same as reaction. There's actual meanings. I think there's meaning at all the levels of life. So I think as soon as there's life, there is something like a soul. I want to note there's a similar question for the naturalist, right? At what point did consciousness enter the world? What was the first conscious being? Is this something that comes by degrees? Is this something like, was there a critter that had no consciousness at all, and then its descendant had at least a little bit of consciousness? So this is a game everybody can play. This, how did this? What was the first one? And it's an interest. And I don't want to denigrate the game because I think it's a great question. And I think thinking about it leads to really interesting theories.
Thank you. I mean, so my own view is that it does come in degrees, and it's not an absolute, and there can be vague, not yet conscious shimmerings of mentality that, as things get more complex and more developed in the systems, become consciousness. But I think we're familiar with this to some degree. When you wake up in the morning, are you fully conscious? If you're anything like me, the answer is no. You're kind of stumbling around, trying to make the kids' lunch, putting the wrong thing in, and then, lights dawn slowly, as they say. So I don't see the particular sharp line there. But I do wonder, for the dualists, again, I just think it's a great question. So are viruses, do they have souls? Are they, because there seem to be boundary cases to me. And how do you get degrees of dignity here? Because one of the points Alex made was about dignity coming in at the human level, and there might be souls without dignity then. So again, I'm not saying you have to answer this. I just say these are questions that we can ask.
Yeah, and actually, if I could maybe push Alex a little bit on this one. So I think as I understand, or as I read one version of the question is, I think the question you addressed, but I think maybe a different reading of the question might be like, at when in the process of evolution do you have this thing with dignity, right?
Yeah.
Such as we are, right?
And I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, but it seems like if we have dignity, and if unicellular critters do not have dignity, then logic says there must be a first time dignity occurred. And this is not specific to dualism or physicalism, it's just logic requires this. Now, you might go for some non-classical logic in which some things are neither true nor false, or are both true and false. But if you've got classical logic, there has to be a first thing. And there are some things with dignity and some things without. And there haven't always been things with dignity. There must have been a first one. And there's no avoiding that. I don't know when exactly it is. My suspicion is that the dignity, sort of, when I read about species of hominids like Neanderthals and the so-called hobbits, I am inclined to think of them all as humans, and that they all have dignity. So I don't think dignity is limited to Homo sapiens. I'm inclined to think, though, that currently chimpanzees and dolphins and dogs do not have it. But in any case, everybody, I think, has to say that at some point there has to be dignity. And by the way, not having dignity doesn't mean you're valueless and anything can be done with you. Dignity is this special kind of consideration where you have, like, these, in my view, absolute kinds of rights, like not to be murdered. Whereas if you just have value, it's a matter of weighing. Yeah, do I kill one dog to save 3 dogs or to save 2 humans? That's a worthwhile question.
So another question for Josh here. This is following on some of the earlier questions. So how do we know certain clear moral claims within a naturalist framework? So things like do not murder, do we know these things by, like, scientific hypothesis, or is it something else? How do we know these things?
Yeah, another small question there, right? So there's, again, a number of different approaches here. One worth mentioning is the view of Thomas Hobbes, that we have inherently a right to self-preservation that you come in with. And when you're amongst other people who also have these rights, he thought the state of nature, just the natural state, that would be a very bad state. We'd all be battling with each other. The war of all against all, where the life of man, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, in the greatest sentence in English philosophy. So in order to enter into commodious living, we make a contract, in essence, a social contract not to murder each other. And all that's natural because it's supposed to be part of our nature to want what we want and to have our own goals and to have self-preservation. But amongst others who are like us, it is best, it's better for us all to come to some kind of agreement like that to get society. Now, is that enough? Is that the real proper moral there? Or is that merely some convention, some arrangement that's convenient? it does feel much weaker than the kind of thing we think of when we think of this deeper moral claims. But now if you blend this with a kind of evolutionary story that we evolved to live in groups, and so we internalize rules to establish that kind of agreement, it might feel that way to us, this deeper way, because that works better for our society. And we get along, well, if you had this many dogs in the room, what would it be like, right? It'd be crazy. But here we're all sitting here quite nicely, and because we know there are rules, we're built for that. Built for it by what? Well, I claim by evolution. There might be other stories, right? And we might have evolved to be built to follow rules about keeping social order, allowing our groups to function. And so there are natural ways to get something in there, right? Something in the right direction. Will it really be enough? I had to tell at the end there a kind of what you might call a debunking story. We feel it's stronger than it is because it's useful for evolution or something, but it's not really that. And so I understand that. I don't mean to denigrate it, but I mean that's, there are stories to be told like that in the natural sense. Do they get all the way to what we want? It depends on what we want.
I am kind of curious, about these debunking stories. Like, if we give these debunking stories, will these feelings survive?
So I think probably my guess would be these things are very deep-seated, and the answer is yes. So knowing, let's just say someone, God comes down and says, Nietzsche's right, which is a great idea. So Nietzsche's right, I don't exist, so it's a burning bush telling you this. What do we do with that? So Nietzsche thought maybe some among us would somehow handle that, but most of us won't, and we'll be stuck with it. I think we have deep-seated kind of built-in ways that we are. And so I don't think we'll find it satisfying. I think that's one of the interesting paradoxes or challenges of naturalism. It'll never sound right. I'm trying.
So there's a question for Alex, but I think I'd be interested to hear what Josh has to say about this as well. So for Alex, what would be the difference between consciousness and a soul? So animals have some consciousness, but don't have dignity, as we were mentioning earlier. So what would be the difference?
So I think that my best theory as to what is the difference between animals, non-human animals that are not rational, and us, is that we have a concept of the good as such. So we can choose to follow things that are good just because they are good, not specific good things. Animals pursue food and reproduction, and those things are good for them, and they recognize this food or this instance of reproduction is good. But we have the concept of the good, and we can try to think, okay, so what things are good? We can reflect on this, and then we can decide which ones whether to pursue it or not to pursue it, which goods to pursue. So I think there's a kind of conceptual understanding of the good that distinguishes us.
Yeah, I like that way of putting it. And I agree with everything except for I think that that's, can be explained naturalistically. That as we become mentally more complex as our brains evolve, we come to be able to abstract and think about things in these much more broad and general and universal senses, including good. And then, yeah, I agree, we're at a different place. But again, I think the story can be told that will be naturalistic.
So Josh, so we've been talking about optimism, about science. So this questioner asks, how do you maintain explanatory optimism in the face of the persistent turnover or recontextualization of major scientific theories, especially in physics? So it's like, hey, it turns out that what we thought was a fact is no longer a fact, and theories radically change. So how do you maintain optimism in the face of that?
In philosophy of science, this is called the pessimistic meta-induction. Every time you think you got science right, it totally changes. So look at the history of science, do some science on that. You think you have any reason to believe your own current theory? That's a bummer. And it's literally called pessimistic. Well, I hold that there is progress in science and we're getting closer to the truth. I actually hold that there's truth. I mean, some people I think there's a real world out there, and our theories, when they're getting better, are getting closer to describing the real world, separate from us. And so think that Newton was wrong. I think Newton is right. He's a special case of Einstein, and you can see it in Newton's theory. When you're not going too fast and nothing's too massive, you can see Newton. Now, is it exactly Newton? No, of course not. But enough where you can see what the philosopher Paul Churchland called an image of Newton in the Einstein. So we're getting closer to something. So, yeah, I mean, so I think we're getting better. And I think, I don't think unlike Thomas Kuhn, the great philosopher of science, it's a paradigm shift. All bets are off. Everything's different. Day is night, night is day. Well, no, I don't think that's right. I think that's the wrong view of science. But I acknowledge that science sometimes changes its mind. I think it's a human enterprise where it's a work in progress. And so sometimes you're going to have to deal with it. And that's exciting. But I do think for certain things, we're on the right track. Otherwise, this wouldn't work. Like me talking into this wouldn't come out. So electricity is a thing. And the vibrating of my voice on the diaphragm, making a little magnet move, so Clerk, Maxwell, and Faraday got that right. And that's why it works. And if we alter our picture of that, we're going to have to keep that part. So it'll be an improvement. Right. Optimistic, right? Mm-hmm. Go team! Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So this might be our last question for the night, and also last question for Alex. So what is a soul? And how do you know this?
I'd be getting softballs. They heard my world record. They're trying to get...
So here's the cheap answer is we don't know, just like we don't know what matter is. And I think that there's a lot to this cheap answer, right? In fact, there's a kind of very deep question behind our debate that we really didn't address, which is, okay, what is the physical? He's claiming that the physical is all there is. I'm claiming there's more than the physical. But what is the physical, right? So I'm claiming there's this thing called the soul. Why isn't that just another item in physical reality? Why are atoms physical? Count as physical? Maybe they're not. This is a very difficult question, right? What counts as physical, what isn't? My own view, and I don't know, this may be similar to what Josh thinks too, is that the physical is things that are sort of in the spirit of the kinds of things that science investigates, that have a kind of family resemblance. So if you could imagine a future physics that's very different, but it's still recognizably talking about the physical. But if it starts talking about magical spells and things with like intrinsic meanings in the universe, like particles that have that mean something, then it's moving away from the physical. So we have a bit of a sense on the physical, but it's kind of vague. The soul then is going to be something non-physical. That's the first part, but we've already gotten to, we're not really clear on what the physical is. And then I think what we can say is something like, well, what is its function? What does it do for? It is responsible for thought, consciousness. It is responsible for our freedom. We can give a few other things of what it is responsible for. And that's a kind of functional characterization, which is interesting because functional characterizations are very common in naturalism as well. So what is an electron? Well, it's something that behaves in such and such a way. It's repelled from other electrons, attracted to things with positive charge, has a spin. You can say a few things about what it does, but what is it fundamentally deep down? Nobody knows. We know the equations that describe some of its behavior. We can say something about the behavior of souls. And some of these things, even Josh and I will agree. He'll just take it a little more metaphorically than I will. He'll say, yeah, this person has a beautiful soul. Their beautiful soul is exhibited through these things that they have done. And we will actually agree about a number of these things that we say about it. So we can say those things. And so we can say a little bit about what the soul does. And then about its fundamental nature, beyond the fact that it's not physical, it's going to be very hard to say anything about, but the same is true for anything else.
Thank you for that, Alex. In fact, one of our questioners was asking what is matter and what is mind. So that might be for our next event. So please join me in thanking Alex and Josh.
Lots of fun.
Thank you both. Well done. So just a couple of thank yous before we wrap up and a couple of announcements. So big thanks to our Houston Institute Board of Directors. We couldn't do this without you. Special thanks also to James Prather, my partner in crime back there. If you see him, make sure to thank James. Thank you also to our student leaders and volunteers, AJ Shin, Thomas Lushington, and Alden Ness. And as you can tell, we're also recording this event, so be on the lookout for a recording later. Final closing ads. Again, you got the free version, you get some ads. So first, if you like this, our next big event will be a poetry reading with Professor R.S. Gwynn. Save the date on Monday, November 11th. So be on the lookout for that. If you're on our mailing list, you should be getting already information on that. Students and members of the community are most welcome. Also, if you are a student here who is new to what we're doing, make sure to grab one of us and hear about how you can get plugged in. If you're a community member and you're new to this, again, make sure to grab one of us and see how you can get plugged in. Finally, I need to say this, we're an independently funded 501c3. We're a nonprofit and function entirely from donations and grants from people like you. So if you like what we did tonight, please consider making a donation. Again, we have this wonderful matching grant opportunity. All new donations are matched dollar for dollar. Increased donations are matched by the increase. So please make sure to find me if you want to hear more about that. And finally, as we said, we have a reception afterwards outside. So I hope you will join us and join me again in thanking Alex and Josh for a wonderful night. Thank you. Good work. Thank you.